July 5, 1968, 9:23 p.m., Bumpy Johnson's apartment on Macomb's Place, Harlem. The most powerful black gangster in American history sat in his leather armchair, a glass of cognac untouched on the table beside him. He was 62 years old. He looked 80. His hands trembled when he reached for his cigarette. His breath came in shallow rasps. Across from him sat Frank Lucas, 37 years old. The man who'd been his driver, his bodyguard, his shadow for the past 8 years. Bumpy had summoned him tonight with 3 words: "We need to talk." In 48 hours, Bumpy Johnson would be dead. He knew it. The doctors had told him his heart was failing. But before he died, he had one last lesson to teach, one last gift to give, and one condition that would determine whether Frank Lucas inherited an empire, nothing at all. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson was and what he meant to Harlem. For 40 years, Bumpy had ruled these streets, not with an army, not with guns blazing, with intelligence, with discipline, with a code that everyone understood and everyone respected. He'd fought the Dutch Schultz mob in the 1930s. He'd survived wars with the Italians. He'd been to prison and come back stronger. He'd built a network that touched every corner of Harlem numbers running: protection, policy banks, and yes, narcotics. But more than that, Bumpy Johnson was Harlem. He fed families when they were hungry. He paid rent when landlords came calling. He settled disputes that would have turned into bloodbath. The cops knew him. The politicians knew him. The Italian families in Little Italy knew him. And they all gave him respect. Frank had come into Bumpy's orbit in 1960, a country boy from LaGrange, North Carolina, with nothing but hunger and a willingness to do whatever it took. He'd started as muscle, then a driver, then something more, a student. For 8 years, Frank had watched Bumpy operate, watched how he handled money, watched how he handled people, watched how he could walk into a room full of Italian bosses and walk out with exactly what he wanted, without ever raising his voice. "You're different," Bumpy had told him once, maybe 3 years into their arrangement. "The other boys, they want flash cars, women, attention. You just watch. You calculate. That's rare." Frank had said nothing, just nodded, kept watching, kept calculating. Now Bumpy was dying, and everyone in Harlem knew it. The wolves were circling. The Italians were already making moves, talking about who would manage Harlem after Bumpy was gone. Nicky Barnes, that flashy young dealer from uptown, was building his own operation, waiting for the moment he could make his play. A dozen other hustlers, dealers, and would-be kings were sharpening their knives. Harlem without Bumpy Johnson was a throne without a king, and everyone wanted to sit in that chair. But Bumpy hadn't called Frank here to talk about the wolves. He'd called him to talk about something else entirely. "Close the door," Bumpy said. His voice was weaker than Frank had ever heard it. Frank closed the door, sat down across from the old man, waited. Bumpy studied him for a long moment. Those eyes even now, even dying still, saw everything. "I'm not going to make it to August," Bumpy said. "No self-pity, no drama, just fact. Doctors say my heart could go any day now. Could be tomorrow, could be next week, but it's coming." Frank didn't insult him with false hope. "I know," he said quietly. Bumpy nodded. "Appreciated that. Good. Then we can skip the bullshit and talk about what matters." Bumpy reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small leather notebook, set it on the table between them. "This is 40 years of my life," he said. "Every contact, every connection, every politician I own, every cop on my payroll, every Italian who owes me favors, the numbers banks, the distribution routes, the safe houses, everything." Frank looked at the notebook, didn't touch it. "Why are you showing me this?" Bumpy's eyes hardened. "Because I'm giving it to you. All of it, Harlem, the operation, the connections, everything I built." The words hung in the air like smoke. Frank felt his heart hammering in his chest, but his face showed nothing. Bumpy had taught him that never show what you're feeling. Never give anyone that weapon. "There are men who've been with you longer," Frank said carefully. Men who are idiots." Bumpy cut him off. "Men who would burn everything I built within 6 months. They're muscle. You're something else." He leaned forward, and even that small movement seemed to cost him. "I've watched you for 8 years, Frank. You don't drink to excess. You don't chase women who will get you killed. You don't flash money or run your mouth. You think, you plan. You see 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still figuring out their first. He tapped the notebook. That's why this goes to you, not them. Frank reached out, touched the leather cover of the notebook. 40 years of empire, in a book small enough to fit in a coat pocket. What's the condition? He asked. Because there was always a condition. Bumpy Johnson never gave anything for free. Bumpy smiled. First time Frank had seen him smile in weeks. Smart. That's why I chose you. He settled back in his chair, lit another cigarette with trembling hands. Took a long drag. The condition is this: you don't become me. Frank frowned. Didn't understand? Bumpy saw his confusion and continued, I built something here, something real. But I built it the old way, paying taxes to the Italians, playing by their rules, taking whatever they decided to give me. His voice turned bitter. 40 years, Frank. 40 years I ran Harlem, and I still had to go downtown and kiss rings. Still had to give them their cut. Still had to smile and pretend we were partners when we both knew I was just a help. He stubbed out his cigarette with sudden anger. I was the most powerful black man in New York, and I was still on a leash. You understand what I'm telling you? Frank understood. He'd seen it himself. The way Bumpy had to defer to men who weren't half as smart. The way he had to accept terms that were insults. The way even the king of Harlem had to bow to kings from other kingdoms. I understand, Frank said. Then here's my condition. Bumpy's eyes locked onto his. Don't play their game. Don't pay their taxes. Don't bow. I spent 40 years being the biggest man in a small room. You, he pointed at Frank with a trembling finger, you find a way to build your own room, your own rules, your own empire that doesn't depend on the Italian mob or anyone else letting you exist. Frank sat with that for a moment. It was a big ask. The Italians controlled the drug supply. The Italians controlled the unions, the docks, the police. Going against them wasn't ambition, it was suicide. How? Frank asked. They control everything. The supply chain. The distribution. You go around them, they crush you. Bumpy nodded slowly. They control the supply chain because nobody ever thought to build another one. The French connection, the Sicilian refineries, that's their pipeline, and everyone drinks from it because nobody had the vision to dig their own well. He leaned forward again. But there are other sources. Frank, Asia, the Golden Triangle, places the Italians have never even thought about because they're too comfortable with what they have. Frank's mind was already racing. He'd heard about the Golden Triangle. Poppy fields in Thailand, Burma, Laos, more raw product than anywhere else on Earth. But it was on the other side of the world. The logistics alone seemed impossible. It's never been done, Frank said. Good, Bumpy replied. That means nobody's expecting it. Nobody's guarding against it. The Italians have had 50 years to build walls around their operation, but they never thought to build walls around something that didn't exist yet. He tapped the notebook again. In here, you'll find a name. Ike Atkinson. Army sergeant stationed in Bangkok. He's got connections in the triangle. Real connections. Military supply routes. I was going to reach out to him myself, but he gestured at his failing body. Time had run out. Frank picked up the notebook, held it in his hands. It weighed almost nothing, but he could feel the gravity of it. 40 years of power. A roadmap to an empire. And a mission. Don't just inherit Harlem, transform it. Break free from the Italian leash that Bumpy had worn his whole life. There's something else, Bumpy said. His voice was getting weaker. Fatigue pulling at him. The Italians aren't your only problem. Harlem's full of young men who think they can take what's yours. Nicky Barnes. That boy's got ambition and no sense. He'll come at you eventually. So will others. He fixed Frank with a hard stare. When they do, don't make a show of it. Don't grandstand. Handle it quiet, handle it once, and then move on. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. You remember that? Frank nodded. He would remember. He would remember everything from this night until the day he died. One more thing, Bumpy said. He was fading now. Eyes heavy, breath shorter. Family. Use family. Those brothers of yours back in North Carolina, bring them up here. Blood is the only thing you can trust in this business. Hired men can be bought. Friends can be turned, but family stays loyal because their fate is tied to yours. He closed his eyes for a moment. I never had that. Built my operation with men I thought I could trust. Half of them would have sold me out for the right price. You have something I never had. Use it." Frank stood up, put the notebook in his inside jacket pocket, close to his heart. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. "Anything I can do for you before?" Bumpy waved his hand weakly. "I need you to do what I said. Build something I never could. That's what I need. That's the only thing I need." He opened his eyes one more time. 48 hours, Frank? Maybe less. After that, the wolves come. You ready?" Frank looked at the man who had taught him everything, the man who had lifted him from nothing and shown him what power really looked like. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "I know you are." Bumpy closed his eyes again. "Now get out. Let an old man rest." Frank walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "Bumpy," the old man opened one eye. "Thank you. For everything." Bumpy Johnson smiled one last time. "Don't thank me. Just don't waste it." Frank walked out into the Harlem night. 48 hours. Then everything would change. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968, at Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue. Heart attack. He was eating dinner when it happened. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. The funeral was the biggest Harlem had ever seen. Politicians, cops, Italian bosses from downtown, everyone came to pay respects to the man who had ruled these streets for 4 decades. Frank stood in the back, watching. The notebook was still in his jacket. The lesson was still in his head. The wolves were already circling, just like Bumpy had said. But they didn't know what Frank knew. They didn't have what Frank had, and they couldn't see what Frank was about to build. Within 6 months, Frank Lucas reached out to Ike Atkinson in Bangkok. Within a year, he was on a plane to the Golden Triangle with $400,000 in cash. Within 2 years, he had cut the Italians out completely and was importing heroin directly from Southeast Asia through military channels that nobody could touch. Blue magic, 98% pure, half the price of anything else on the street. He brought his brothers up from North Carolina, just like Bumpy said. Built an operation that was family only. No outsiders. No weak links. When Nicky Barnes tried to make his move, Frank handled it quiet. Handled it once, no grandstanding, no war. Just a message that everyone understood. By 1970, Frank Lucas was making $1 million a day. Cash, every day. The Italians couldn't figure out where his supply was coming from. The feds couldn't crack his organization. He had done exactly what Bumpy Johnson had asked. Built his own room, his own rules, an empire that didn't depend on anyone else's permission to exist. The country boy from North Carolina had surpassed his teacher, but he never forgot where it came from. Never forgot that night in Bumpy's apartment. Never forgot the leather notebook and the lesson that came with it. Years later, when reporters asked him about Bumpy Johnson, Frank would get quiet, respectful. "He taught me everything," Frank would say. "But the most important thing he taught me was that being the king isn't enough. Not if you're still wearing someone else's crown. You have to forge your own crown. Build your own kingdom. Answer to no one." He would pause, look out the window. Bumpy was the greatest gangster Harlem ever saw, but he died still paying taxes to the Italians. I promised him I wouldn't make the same mistake. He kept that promise. For a while, until the chinchilla coat and the photograph and the fall that comes for every king eventually. But that's another story. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. Bumpy Johnson taught him that, and Frank Lucas never forgot. If this story of how power passes from one legend to another hit different, smash that subscribe button right now. We're telling the Frank Lucas stories that American Gangster couldn't show. The lessons, the codes, the moments that made a kingpin. Drop a like if you respect the legacy, and in the comments, what's the most important lesson you ever learned from someone who believed in you? Next up, the story of Frank's first meeting with the Italians after Bumpy's death. When they told him to pay the tax on, he said 6 words that started a war. You don't want to miss it. Subscribe, hit that notification bell. The empire is rising.